"Just hold me tonight," she said in tears, not knowing the stranger was a millionaire who loved her. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew she shouldn't have walked this far alone, but she did. The autumn wind cut through Elisa Moore's thin jacket as she wandered through Central Park's dimly lit pathways. At 26, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that spoke of resilience, though tonight her shoulders sagged under an invisible weight. Her dark skin had a warm undertone that usually glowed with life, but the streetlights caught the exhaustion etched across her delicate features. Her natural hair was pulled back in a simple bun, a few rebellious curls framing her heart-shaped face. She wore a burgundy sweater that complemented her complexion, paired with dark jeans and worn sneakers, the uniform of someone who chose comfort over appearance, authenticity over pretense. The bench appeared like salvation in the darkness. Elisa sank onto the cold wood, finally allowing herself to stop pretending she was okay. Her phone had been buzzing with concern from her sister Jasmine all evening, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. How could she explain that her carefully constructed life had crumbled in just 1 week? Tuesday. "We're restructuring, Elisa. Your position has been eliminated. 5 years of dedication to the marketing firm, reduced to a cardboard box of personal items and a severance check that wouldn't cover 2 months' rent." Wednesday. "I think we want different things, babe." Marcus had said it so casually, as if their 2-year relationship was just another item on his to-do list. As if her love hadn't meant anything. Thursday through Sunday, the slow, suffocating realization that she was truly alone in a city of 8 million people. "Just hold me tonight," she whispered to the empty park, her voice barely audible above the rustle of fallen leaves. The words escaped before she could stop them. A prayer without direction, a plea to the universe that had seemingly forgotten her existence. She didn't notice the man on the adjacent bench until he moved. David Walker had been sitting in the shadows for nearly an hour, wrestling with thoughts that refused to quiet. At 36, he possessed the kind of commanding presence that turned heads in boardrooms and charity galas alike. 6'2", with broad shoulders that filled his tailored charcoal coat, he had the athletic build of someone who still made time for morning runs despite 12-hour workdays. His dark hair was styled with subtle precision, and his steel-grey eyes held an intensity that had intimidated competitors and charmed investors in equal measure. Tonight, however, those eyes reflected something softer, a loneliness that money couldn't cure. He had come to the park seeking solitude after another evening of obligatory networking, another night of being David Walker, the tech mogul, instead of just David, the man who sometimes forgot what it felt like to simply be human. When he heard her whispered words, something shifted in his chest. He turned to see her properly for the first time, this beautiful woman with tears streaming down her face, her vulnerability raw and unguarded. Without conscious thought, he rose from his bench and approached slowly the way one might approach a wounded animal. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice carrying the slight rasp that came from too many late-night conference calls. "I couldn't help but hear you." Elisa looked up, startled. Even in her distressed state, she noticed his striking features, the strong jawline, the way his eyes seemed to actually see her instead of looking through her. There was something in his expression that wasn't pity, but understanding. "I didn't realize anyone else was here," she managed, wiping at her cheeks with the back of her hand. David hesitated for a moment, then sat beside her on the bench, careful to maintain respectful distance. "Sometimes the park is the only place in the city that feels real," he said simply. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the occasional jogger pass under the streetlights. David found himself stealing glances at her profile, noticing the elegant curve of her neck, the way she held herself even in her sadness. There was something about her that felt familiar, though he was certain they'd never met. "Bad week?" he asked finally. Elisa let out a bitter laugh. "That's putting it mildly." She turned to study his face in the lamplight. "You don't look like someone who has bad weeks." "Everyone has bad weeks," David replied, surprising himself with his honesty. "Some of us are just better at hiding it." "Well, I'm apparently terrible at hiding it," she said, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," David said. "Being real in a world full of pretense, that takes courage." Something in his tone made Elisa really look at him. This stranger who had somehow found her in her darkest moment, who spoke to her like she mattered, like her pain was valid. When was the last time someone had done that? "I should probably head home," she said reluctantly. though she made no move to leave. Should and want to are different things, David observed gently. Elisa nodded, fresh tears threatening to spill. I feel so alone. Without thinking, without calculating, without considering the implications, David opened his arms slightly. You said you needed someone to hold you tonight. For a heartbeat, Elisa hesitated. Every rational thought screamed that she didn't know this man, that accepting comfort from a stranger was dangerous. But something deeper, some instinct that had kept her alive through every heartbreak and disappointment, told her he was safe. She leaned into his embrace, and David's arms closed around her with surprising gentleness for someone so solid and strong. She smelled like vanilla and rain, and fit against his chest as if she belonged there. For the first time in years, David felt something crack open in his carefully guarded heart. They stayed that way until the park grew quiet around them, two broken souls finding momentary peace in an unexpected connection. Neither spoke, afraid to break the spell, but both felt something shifting in the space between them, something that would change everything. When Elisa finally pulled back, her eyes met his in the lamplight. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you," David replied, meaning it more than she could know. As she gathered her purse and stood to leave, David felt panic rise in his throat. He couldn't let her disappear into the night, couldn't let this moment be all they ever shared. "The coffee shop on 5th and Madison," he said quickly. "Do you know it?" "Miller's." Elisa paused, looking back at him. "I'm usually there around 8 in the morning," David said, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. "Good coffee, quiet corner tables." Elisa studied his face for a long moment, seeing something there that made her heart skip. "Maybe I'll see you around," she said softly, then turned and walked away into the night. David watched until she was out of sight, then looked down at his hands that could still feel the warmth of her, the trust she'd placed in him. He had held many women, but never like this, never with such pure need meeting such unexpected tenderness. And as he finally made his way home to his empty penthouse, David Walker realized that everything had just changed. She told herself she wasn't going there for him, but her heart knew better. Elisa stood outside Miller's coffee shop at 7:55 a.m., clutching her worn leather purse and questioning every decision that had led her to this moment. She'd barely slept, replaying the stranger's embrace, the warmth of his arms, the unexpected safety she'd felt with someone whose name she didn't even know. The morning sun caught the golden undertones in her skin as she finally pushed through the glass door. Today she wore a cream-colored blouse tucked into dark slacks, her interview outfit. Though she had no interviews scheduled, sometimes dressing the part helped her feel more confident, more like the woman she wanted to be, rather than the one who'd fallen apart in a park. The coffee shop buzzed with the familiar symphony of morning rush, espresso machines hissing, newspapers rustling, hushed conversations blending into white noise. Elisa ordered a simple black coffee, her budget too tight for fancy lattes, and found herself scanning the room with nervous anticipation. He was there. David sat in the far corner, exactly as he'd suggested, behind a sleek laptop with financial reports scattered across the small table. Even in casual clothes, a navy sweater that emphasized his broad shoulders and dark jeans, he commanded attention. His steel-grey eyes were focused intently on his screen until he sensed her presence and looked up. Their eyes met across the crowded cafe, and Elisa felt that same flutter of recognition from the night before. David's face broke into a smile that transformed his entire expression, making him look younger, more approachable. He half rose from his seat, a gesture of old-fashioned politeness that surprised her. "You came," he said simply. "I was in the neighborhood," Elisa replied, then immediately felt foolish for the obvious lie. "Of course," David agreed with a subtle smile that suggested he saw right through her excuse, but found it endearing rather than annoying. "Would you like to sit?" She hesitated for only a moment before sliding into the chair across from him. Up close, in daylight, she could see details she'd missed in the park's shadows, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his hair caught light streaks of silver at the temples, the expensive watch that spoke of success, but was worn with casual indifference. "I'm David, by the way," he said, extending his hand. "Elisa," she replied, noting how his hand engulfed hers, warm and calloused, despite his obvious wealth. "Elisa," he repeated, as if testing how her name felt on his tongue. "It suits you." She laughed softly, a genuine sound that surprised them both. "You don't even know me." "No," David agreed, his gaze steady on hers. "But I'd like to." There was something in his directness that both thrilled and terrified her, Marcus had never looked at her like this, like she was worth understanding, worth the effort of discovery. "What do you do, David?" Elisa asked, deflecting attention from herself. "I bore people with technology solutions," he said with self-deprecating humor. "Software development, mostly. Very thrilling dinner conversation." Elisa studied his face, sensing there was more to the story. The expensive watch, the confident bearing, the way other customers occasionally glanced his way with recognition. This wasn't just any software developer. "And you?" David asked. "Currently between opportunities," Elisa said carefully. "I was in marketing until recently." David nodded, not pressing for details about her obvious job loss. Instead, he said, "Marketing requires creativity, understanding people, what motivates them." "I thought I was good at it," Elisa admitted, surprised by her own honesty. "Turns out I was wrong. Or maybe you were good at it, and they were wrong," David suggested gently. The simple validation hit her unexpectedly hard. When was the last time someone had defended her, even in such a small way? Their conversation flowed easier than it should have between strangers. David asked thoughtful questions, not about her resume or her relationship status, but about her favorite books, her opinions on the city's best hidden spots, her thoughts on whether coffee shops had become the modern equivalent of community centers. "You're not what I expected," Elisa said during a comfortable lull. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone who approaches crying women in parks." She gestured vaguely. "Maybe someone with ulterior motives." David's expression grew serious. "I should clarify something. I didn't approach you with any agenda, Elisa. I heard someone in pain and I couldn't walk away. That's all." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tight. "Why couldn't you walk away?" David was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "Because I know what it feels like to sit alone, pretending you're okay when everything's falling apart. You? But you seem so—" She searched for the right word. "Together." "Appearances can be deceiving," David said with a rueful smile. "Success doesn't immunize you against loneliness." Elisa found herself leaning forward, drawn in by his unexpected vulnerability. This wasn't the polished businessman she'd assumed he was, but someone real, someone who understood the weight of pretending. "Can I ask you something?" she said impulsively. "Anything. Last night when you held me. Why? Really why?" David's eyes grew distant, as if he were seeing something beyond the coffee shop walls. "Because 20 years ago I was 17 and crying on a different park bench, and nobody stopped. Nobody asked if I was okay. I promised myself that if I ever saw someone in that position, I wouldn't walk by." The rawness in his admission hit her like a physical force. This man who seemed to have everything had once been broken too. Before she could respond, David's phone buzzed insistently. He glanced at it and frowned. "I'm sorry, I have to—" "Of course," Elisa said quickly, gathering her purse. "You probably have important things to do." "Actually," David said, standing as she did, "I was hoping we could do this again, tomorrow morning." The hope in his voice was carefully controlled, but she heard it anyway. "I don't want to keep you from your work." Elisa, the way he said her name, stopped her mid-sentence. "I haven't enjoyed a conversation this much in years, please." She looked into his eyes and saw something that made her heart race. Not just interest, but genuine care. "Okay," she whispered. "Same time?" David asked, already knowing he would restructure his entire morning around this answer. "Same time." As she walked toward the door, David called after her. "Elisa?" She turned back. "Thank you for giving a stranger a chance." Outside on the sidewalk, Elisa walked slowly toward the subway, her mind spinning. There was something about David that didn't add up. The expensive watch, the deference from other customers, the way he carried himself. But there was also his genuine kindness, his unexpected understanding of pain. As she descended into the subway station, one thought echoed in her mind. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. But another darker thought followed close behind. What if she was setting herself up for another heartbreak? She didn't notice the black sedan that pulled away from the curb behind her, or the photographer inside who had captured every moment of their coffee shop encounter. The headline stared back at her like a punch to the gut. Tech mogul David Walker spotted in intimate coffee date. Who's the mystery woman? Elisa's hands trembled as she held her sister Corinne's tablet, the gossip website's article displayed in full color. There was the photo, her and David at Miller's, captured in that moment when he'd leaned forward with genuine interest, when she'd felt seen for the first time in months. "Liz, you okay?" Corinne asked from her kitchen, where she was preparing lunch in her cozy Harlem apartment. At 28, Corinne shared Elisa's warm brown eyes and graceful features, but where Elisa was soft curves and gentle strength, Corinne was all sharp angles and fierce protection. Her hair was styled in neat braids, and she wore scrubs from her shift at Mount Sinai Hospital. "You know him!" Elisa's voice came out as barely a whisper. Corinne moved quickly to the couch, taking in her sister's pale expression. "Know who? What's wrong?" "David Walker." Elisa turned the tablet toward her sister. Apparently he's some kind of tech billionaire. Not just successful, actually famous." Corinne's eyes widened as she read. "Walker Technologies. Net worth estimated at 2.4 billion, your youngest CEO to take a company public in the tech sector." She looked up at Elisa with concern. "How do you know David Walker?" "I don't," Elisa said, sinking deeper into the cushions. I thought I was getting to know David, the guy who buys coffee and listens to people's problems." "Not David Walker, the man who could buy the entire coffee shop without checking his bank balance." The apartment fell silent, except for the distant sounds of the city filtering through the windows. Corinne's place was warm and lived in, family photos covering every surface, her medical textbook stacked on the coffee table, the scent of her homemade soup filling the air. It was the kind of home Elisa had always envied, full of purpose and belonging. "Tell me everything," Corinne said gently. So Elisa did. She told her about the park, the embrace, the coffee shop conversations that had become the brightest part of her last 3 days. She told her about David's kindness, his vulnerability, the way he made her feel like she mattered. "And you had no idea?" Corinne asked. "None. I knew there was something different about him. The watch, the way he carried himself. But I thought maybe he was just comfortable. Not this." She gestured at the article. Corinne was quiet for a moment, processing. "So what are you going to do?" "What do you mean? Are you going to see him again?" Elisa laughed bitterly. "Cor, look at me. Really look at me. I'm unemployed, living paycheck to paycheck in a studio apartment with a leaky faucet. He's worth more money than I'll see in 10 lifetimes. This is exactly the kind of fairy tale that doesn't happen to women like me." "Women like us, you mean?" Corinne said sharply. "Don't do that, Lise. Don't make yourself smaller because someone else is bigger." "It's not about making myself smaller. It's about being realistic. He probably approaches women all the time. Rich guys have hobbies, right? Maybe slumming it with regular people is his thing." Corinne grabbed her sister's hands. "The woman I know doesn't give up this easily. The woman I know fights for what she wants. Maybe that woman died with the last job rejection." Before Corinne could respond, Elisa's phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number, but somehow she knew. "Good morning. I missed you at Miller's today. Everything okay?" David. Elisa showed the message to Corinne, who raised an eyebrow. "Huh. Billionaires text just like regular people. What do I say? The truth. That's what you're good at, remember?" Elisa stared at the phone for a long moment, then typed, "Found out who you really are. Need some time to think." The response came almost immediately. "Can we talk? Please." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to disappear back into her small, safe world where billionaires didn't complicate her coffee routine. But another part, the part that remembered his gentle touch, his understanding eyes, wanted answers. "Miller's. Tomorrow. 8 a.m. Thank you." "You're really going?" Corinne asked. "I need to know if any of it was real." The next morning, Elisa arrived at Miller's 15 minutes early, her stomach churning with anxiety. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a simple black dress that made her feel confident, her hair styled in soft waves that framed her face. If this was going to be their last conversation, she wanted to remember feeling beautiful. David was already there, looking more tense than she'd ever seen him. He stood when she approached, and she noticed the circles under his eyes, the way his usually perfect hair looked like he'd run his fingers through it repeatedly. "Elisa," he said, relief evident in his voice. "David," she replied coolly, taking the seat across from him. They sat in silence for a moment, the easy comfort of their previous meetings replaced by careful distance. "You're angry," David said finally. "I'm confused," Elisa corrected. "Angry would be easier." "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Who you really are, why you were in that park, why you didn't tell me." She met his eyes directly. "Why you lied," David winced. "I never lied to you. Omission is still deception." "You're right." He leaned back, his broad shoulders sagging slightly. "But can I explain?" Elisa nodded, not trusting her voice. "I was in that park because I'd just come from a board meeting where people spent 3 hours discussing my personal life like it was a business strategy. There's a pressure that comes with visibility. Every conversation has an agenda. Every relationship is scrutinized for mutual benefit. He paused, choosing his words carefully. When I met you, you didn't know who I was. You just saw someone willing to listen. Do you have any idea how rare that is? So I was what, an experiment in being normal? No. The force of his response made her look up. You were the first real thing that's happened to me in years. When you cried in that park, when you let me hold you, that wasn't about money or connections or what I could do for you. That was just human. Elisa felt her carefully constructed anger wavering. But you knew I'd find out eventually. I hoped I'd have the courage to tell you myself, before it mattered, before... He stopped. Before what? David's eyes met hers, and she saw something there that made her heart skip. Before I fell in love with you. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Elisa's breath caught, and for a moment the busy coffee shop faded away. You don't even know me, she whispered. I know you take your coffee black because you're too proud to ask for help even when money's tight. I know you listen with your whole heart when someone's talking. I know you're brave enough to trust a stranger in a park and strong enough to walk away when you feel deceived. His voice softened. I know that when you smile, really smile, it changes everything in the room. Tears pricked at Elisa's eyes, but she blinked them back. Money changes everything, David. You have to know that. Then let's forget about the money. You can't just forget about billions of dollars. Watch me, David said with quiet determination. And in that moment, looking into his earnest face, Elisa almost believed he could. Almost. The rain started just as she said yes. One date, Elisa had told David, her voice barely steady. One real date. No coffee shops, no hiding. If we're going to do this, I need to see what your world actually looks like. Now, standing in front of her building's cracked mirror 3 hours later, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. David had promised to pick her up at 7, and it was 6:47. Her hands shook as she applied a final coat of lipstick, a deep berry shade that complemented her skin and gave her courage she didn't feel. She'd chosen a midnight blue dress that hugged her curves without being too revealing, paired with her only good heels and the pearl earrings her grandmother had left her. Her hair fell in soft curls past her shoulders, and she'd spent 20 minutes perfecting her makeup. Looking at herself now, she felt beautiful, but would beautiful be enough in David Walker's world? The buzzer startled her from her thoughts. Miss Moore, there's a car here for you, her building's doorman, Hector, said through the intercom. His voice held a note of confusion that made her stomach clench. Downstairs, through the lobby's glass doors, she saw David standing beside a sleek black sedan. He wore a charcoal suit that was clearly tailored to his tall frame, and even from a distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders. When he spotted her emerging from the building, his face transformed with relief and something deeper. You look, David started, then stopped, shaking his head with a soft laugh. Every word I can think of feels inadequate. Thank you, Elisa said, accepting his offered arm as he helped her into the car. The interior was all soft leather and subtle luxury, the kind of wealth that whispered rather than shouted. Where are we going? She asked, as the driver pulled smoothly into traffic. Dinner, David said simply. Somewhere we can actually talk. 20 minutes later, they pulled up to a restaurant that made Elisa's breath catch. Le Bernardin. She'd read about it in magazines, seen it featured in movies about rich people's lives, but never imagined she'd actually walk through its doors. David, she said quietly as the valet opened her door, this is too much. It's just dinner, he replied, but she caught the uncertainty in his voice. If you're not comfortable. I didn't say I wasn't comfortable. I said it was too much. There's a difference. Inside, the maître d' greeted David by name and led them to a private table overlooking the city lights. The restaurant hummed with the kind of understated elegance that came with astronomical prices and month-long waiting lists. Are you eat here often? Elisa asked, accepting the menu with its complete absence of prices. Honestly, this is the first time I've been here for pleasure rather than business. David leaned forward slightly. Most of my meals are either grabbed between meetings or part of some deal negotiation. I thought tonight should be different. As they ordered, David graciously translating the more elaborate French dishes when she asked, Elisa found herself studying the other diners. Perfectly coiffed women with jewelry that caught the light, men in suits that cost more than her monthly rent, conversations conducted in the careful tones of people accustomed to being overheard. I don't fit here, she said suddenly. David paused, his wine glass halfway to his lips. What makes you say that? Look around, David. Really look. She gestured subtly at the room. I'm a black woman who was unemployed until last week, wearing a dress I bought on sale 2 years ago. To everyone else here looks like they were born for this. And I look like I belong? David asked quietly. Elisa blinked, surprised by the question. Of course you do. You're the son of a single mother who cleaned office buildings at night so I could have school clothes, David finished. I didn't speak to anyone in a place like this until I was 25, and my first company got bought out. The admission hung between them like a bridge she hadn't expected. I learned to fit in, David continued, his voice dropping lower. Designer suits, proper wine pairings, the right schools on my resume after the fact, but some nights I still feel like that 17-year-old kid crying on a park bench because he didn't know how to pay for college. Elisa stared at him, seeing something new in his familiar features. You never said... It's not exactly the biography they put in Forbes, David said with a rueful smile. Tech prodigy pulls himself up by his bootstraps, makes a better story than scared kid gets lucky with timing, and works himself half to death. Their appetizers arrived, delicate arrangements that looked more like art than food. Elisa took a careful bite, surprised by the explosion of flavors. This is incredible, she admitted. The chef studied in Lyon for 6 years, David said, then caught himself. Sorry, I sound like a pretentious ass. You sound like someone sharing information, Elisa corrected gently. There's a difference. They fell into easier conversation as the meal progressed. David told her about his first disastrous attempt at fine dining, when he'd ordered the most expensive thing on the menu and nearly gagged on the foie gras. Elisa shared stories about her grandmother's Sunday dinners, where love was measured in seconds of sweet potato pie and the volume of laughter around the table. So I miss that, David said wistfully. The noise, the chaos. My penthouse is so quiet sometimes I can hear my own heartbeat. You could change that, Elisa suggested. How? She met his eyes across the candlelit table. Fill it with people who matter. Something shifted in David's expression, hope mixed with vulnerability that made her chest tight. Their main courses arrived, and David surprised her by asking about her marketing background. Not the polite small talk she'd expected, but genuine interest in her creative process, her favorite campaigns, her thoughts on consumer psychology. You should start your own consultancy, he said, after she described her approach to brand storytelling. With what capital? Elisa laughed. My severance is covering rent and groceries. I could... No. The word came out sharper than she intended. David, no. He held up his hands in surrender. I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking. You were thinking like someone who solves problems with money, Elisa said more gently. But some things can't be fixed with a check. What can they be fixed with? Elisa considered the question seriously. Time, trust, knowing that someone believes in you for reasons that have nothing to do with what you can do for them. David nodded slowly. I'm still learning how to do that. We both are, Elisa admitted. As dessert was served, a chocolate creation that defied physics, David's phone buzzed insistently. He glanced at it and frowned. Everything okay? Elisa asked. Business crisis. Something that apparently can't wait until tomorrow. David's jaw tightened as he read. I need to make one call, 5 minutes, I promise. As he stepped away from the table, Elisa found herself alone with her thoughts and the weight of curious stares from other diners. She could hear whispered conversations, caught fragments of speculation about David's mystery date. When he returned, his expression was grim. Problem? She asked. The story about us made the financial blogs, David said quietly. My board is concerned about the attention. Concerned how? David hesitated, and in that hesitation, Elisa saw the answer. They don't think I'm appropriate for your image, she said flatly. They don't know you, David said quickly. They're reacting to headlines and photographs. They're reacting to exactly what they see. A black woman with no connections and no money, potentially damaging their golden boy's reputation. Elisa, it's okay, David. She stood, gathering her purse with steady hands despite her racing heart. I understand business. I understand image management. And I understand that some bridges are too far to cross. David rose quickly, reaching for her hand. Don't do this. Don't let them win. They're not winning, Elisa said softly, looking into his desperate grey eyes. They're just being honest about reality. As she walked away from the table, through the restaurant full of people who belonged to his world, Elisa felt something breaking inside her chest, but she kept walking, her head held high, her grandmother's pearls catching the light. Behind her she heard David call her name, but she didn't turn around. Some fairy tales, she thought, as the valet called her a taxi, weren't meant to have happy endings. The knock on her door came at 6 a.m., sharp and insistent. Elisa stumbled from her bed, still wearing yesterday's clothes, her makeup smeared, and her heart raw from a sleepless night of replaying every moment at Le Bernardin. Through the peephole, she saw an elegant older woman with silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, wearing a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than Elisa's rent. "Can I help you?" Elisa called through the door, suddenly aware of how her voice sounded, hoarse from crying, thick with exhaustion. "My name is Genevieve Walker," the woman replied with crisp authority. "I'm David's mother. We need to talk." Elisa's hand froze on the chain lock. David's mother. Here. At her apartment building in Washington Heights, a world away from the gleaming towers of Manhattan, where people like the Walkers lived. Just a minute," Elisa managed, rushing to her tiny bathroom to splash water on her face and run a brush through her hair. She threw on a clean sweater over her wrinkled dress and took a deep breath before opening the door. Genevieve Walker was smaller than she'd appeared through the peephole, but her presence filled the narrow hallway. She was probably in her early 60s, with intelligent hazel eyes that reminded Elisa painfully of David's, and the kind of bone-deep elegance that couldn't be bought. Her wedding rings caught the fluorescent light, simple bands that spoke of enduring love rather than ostentatious display. "Mrs. Walker," Elisa said carefully, "I'm surprised to see you." "I'm sure you are. May I come in?" Elisa's studio apartment had never felt smaller than it did when she opened the door wider. The Murphy bed she hadn't had time to fold up, the tiny kitchenette with dishes from last night's dinner still in the sink, the single window that looked out onto the fire escape, all of it seemed to shrink under Genevieve's calm gaze. "I apologize for the early hour," Genevieve said, settling onto Elisa's small couch with the grace of someone comfortable anywhere. "I wanted to catch you before you left for work." "I'm actually between jobs at the moment," Elisa said, perching on the edge of her desk chair. "Yes, I know. I also know you walked out of dinner with my son last night." Heat flooded Elisa's cheeks. "Did he send you here?" "David has no idea I'm here, and if you tell him, he'll probably have me committed." Genevieve's smile was wry, almost conspiratorial. "He gets that protective streak from me, I'm afraid." "Then why are you here?" Genevieve studied her for a long moment, those hazel eyes taking in everything, the carefully organized space, the books stacked neatly on makeshift shelves, the single photo of Elisa and Corinne laughing at some long-ago family gathering. "Because I've watched my son move through the world for 36 years, and I've never seen him the way he was when he called me at midnight, asking what he should do when the woman he loves thinks he's not worth the trouble." The words hit Elisa like a physical blow. "He said that. Not in those exact words. David's never been one to express emotion easily. Too much of his father in him that way." Genevieve's voice softened. "But I raised that boy from nothing, Miss Moore. I know when he's fighting for something that matters." "Mrs. Walker," Elisa began, but the older woman held up her hand. "Please, call me Jenny, and before you tell me all the reasons this won't work, let me tell you a story." Without waiting for permission, Genevieve continued. 37 years ago, I was working 3 jobs to keep David and myself afloat after his father died. One of those jobs was cleaning offices in the financial district. Every night, I'd push my cart through those marble lobbies, invisible to the men in expensive suits who worked there during the day. Elisa found herself leaning forward, drawn in despite herself. "One night, I was cleaning the executive floor when I heard shouting from the corner office. A young man, couldn't have been more than 25, was having what I now recognize as a panic attack. His company had just gone under, and he was facing bankruptcy. When he saw me, he was so embarrassed, but I made him sit down, got him some water, talked him through it." "What happened to him?" Elisa asked quietly. "He rebuilt, started over, became very successful." Genevieve's eyes twinkled. 5 years later, when he was established enough to feel secure, he tracked me down, asked me to dinner at the fanciest restaurant I'd ever seen. Understanding dawned slowly. David's father. Thomas Walker was old money, the kind of family that could trace their lineage back to the Mayflower. I was a widow with a small child and calluses on my hands from scrubbing floors. Genevieve held out her hands, and Elisa could see the faint marks that no amount of luxury could completely erase. "His family was horrified. They cut him off completely. But you married him." "I almost didn't. The night he proposed, I gave him the same speech you probably gave David, about different worlds, about not fitting in, about saving him from making a mistake." Genevieve's voice grew tender. "You know what he said to me?" Elisa shook her head. He said, "Jenny, I don't want a wife who fits into my world. I want a wife who makes me want to build a better world." Tears pricked at Elisa's eyes. "That's beautiful, but Thomas died when David was 15, Genevieve continued. "Cancer, quick and brutal, but those 20 years we had together, they were worth every disapproving stare, every whispered comment, every door that closed in our faces." The apartment fell quiet except for the distant sounds of the city waking up. Elisa wiped at her eyes, trying to process everything Genevieve had shared. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked finally. "Because David is more like his father than he knows, and because I see the same look in his eyes now that Thomas had when he talked about me." Genevieve leaned forward, her voice growing intense. "That boy has never brought a woman to meet me, Miss Moore. Never even mentioned dating seriously. But he's called me 4 times since yesterday trying to figure out how to fix whatever went wrong." "The board of directors," Elisa said weakly. "The image concerns will be David's to handle. He's not his father's son for nothing." Genevieve stood, smoothing down her coat. "The question isn't whether David can handle the pressures of his world. The question is whether you care enough about him to let him try." At the door, Genevieve paused. "One more thing. That restaurant last night, David had never been there for pleasure. He chose it because he researched the best places in the city, and he wanted you to have something special. Not because he was showing off, but because he thought you deserved the best." After Genevieve left, Elisa sat in her quiet apartment, staring at her phone. David had texted 12 times since last night. Apologies, explanations, pleas for another chance. She'd ignored them all. But now, thinking about a young man calling his mother at midnight, desperate for advice about love, she felt something shift in her chest. Maybe some bridges were worth the risk of crossing after all. Her phone buzzed with another message from David. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I'm not giving up. You're worth fighting for, even if you don't see it yet." For the first time since walking away from that restaurant, Elisa smiled. Then she typed back, "Miller's. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. We need to talk." His response was immediate. "Thank you." Outside her window, the sun was finally breaking through the clouds, casting golden light across the fire escape where someone had planted flowers in coffee cans. Beautiful things, Elisa thought, could grow anywhere if they had enough determination. And maybe, just maybe, so could love. He was already there when she arrived, looking like he hadn't slept either. David sat in their usual corner at Miller's, but everything about him was different. His normally pristine appearance was disheveled, shirt wrinkled, hair mussed as if he'd been running his hands through it all night. When he looked up and saw her approaching, the relief that flooded his face was so profound, it made her chest ache. "Elisa," he said, standing quickly and nearly knocking over his untouched coffee. "You came." "I said I would." She slid into the chair across from him, noting the dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his broad shoulders. "You look terrible." "I feel worse," David admitted with a rueful laugh. "I keep replaying last night, trying to figure out where I went wrong." "You didn't go wrong," Elisa said quietly. "The situation went wrong. There's a difference." David leaned forward, his grey eyes searching her face. "Then why did you leave?" Elisa took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Because for a moment, sitting in that restaurant, I felt like I was playing dress-up in someone else's life. Like I was pretending to be something I'm not, and eventually everyone would figure it out. And now I had a very interesting conversation with your mother." David's eyes widened. "My mother? When did you—" He stopped, understanding dawning across his features. "She didn't." "She did, 6 a.m., my apartment. Very dramatic entrance." "Elisa, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she would—" "Don't apologize," Elisa interrupted. "She helped me understand some things." David waited, his entire body tense with anticipation. "She told me about your father, about how they met, what they overcame." Elisa met his eyes directly. "She also told me you've never brought a woman to meet her before." A flush crept up David's neck. "My mother has a big mouth." "She has good instincts," Elisa corrected gently, "and she raised a good man." Something shifted in David's expression. Hope mixed with uncertainty. "Where does that leave us?" "That depends." Elisa folded her hands on the table, steadying herself. "Are you willing to fight for this, really fight? Not just against your board or public opinion, but against every voice that says people like us don't belong together?" "Yes," David said without hesitation. "But I need to know you're willing to fight too." "I am," Elisa said, surprised by the conviction in her own voice, "but I have conditions." "Anything. First, no more hiding. If we do this, we do it honestly. I won't be your secret and you won't be mine. David nodded. Agreed. Second, I pay my own way. Dinners, movies, coffee. I contribute. I won't be kept, David. I'll be partnered. Elisa, I make more in a day than most people make in a year. The idea of splitting the check is important to me, she finished firmly. I need to maintain my independence. My sense of self-worth can't be tied to your bank account. David was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, we'll figure out a system that works for both of us. Third, Elisa continued, her voice softening, when the world gets ugly, and it will, we face it together. No running, no assuming the other person can't handle it. Like you did last night? David asked gently. Elisa winced. I'm still learning too. We both are, David agreed. What else? One more thing. Elisa hesitated, then pushed forward. I want to meet your world properly. Not as your charity case or your rebellion, but as the woman you're choosing to be with. That means meeting your friends, your colleagues, understanding your business. If I'm going to be part of your life, I need to understand all of it. David reached across the table and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. The simple contact sent warmth up her arm, reminding her of why she was willing to take this risk. My board meeting is Thursday, he said quietly. They want to discuss the situation with my personal life. What will you tell them? The truth, that I'm in love with an extraordinary woman who happens to be black, brilliant, and too good for me. That if they have a problem with that, they can find a new CEO. Elisa's breath caught. David, you can't just... Yes, I can. The company is mine, Elisa. I built it from nothing. They work for me, not the other way around. His grip on her hand tightened. But more importantly, I won't be with someone I have to hide or apologize for. You're not a liability. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. The conviction in his voice made her eyes water. What if they force you to choose? Then I choose you, David said simply. Every time without question. Even if it costs you everything. David was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing patterns on the back of her hand. Elisa, I've spent 15 years building a company, accumulating wealth, achieving everything I thought I wanted. But until I held you in that park, I didn't realize how empty it all felt. Money can't hold you when you cry. Success can't make you laugh at terrible movies. Power can't love you back. Tears spilled over Elisa's cheeks. You don't know what you're saying. You don't know what it's like to face that kind of scrutiny, that level of judgment. Then teach me, David said urgently. Help me understand, but don't ask me to choose between you and a world that means nothing without you in it. Elisa looked into his eyes and saw something that took her breath away. Not just love, but certainty. This wasn't a man caught up in the romance of rebellion. This was a man who had made his choice and was prepared to live with the consequences. Okay, she whispered. Okay? Okay. We'll try. Really try. She wiped at her tears with her free hand. But David, if this gets too hard, if the pressure becomes too much... It won't, David said firmly. And even if it does, we'll handle it together. As if summoned by their reconciliation, David's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and frowned. Business? Elisa asked. My assistant. Probably about the board meeting. David declined the call without hesitation. Whatever it is can wait. Today is about us. The gesture, small but significant, made Elisa smile. So what do we do now? David grinned, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked completely relaxed. Now I take my girlfriend on a proper second date, somewhere we can actually talk without photographers or gossip columnists or board members interfering. Where did you have in mind? My apartment, David said, then quickly added, not like that. I mean, unless you want... What I'm trying to say is, I want to cook for you, show you who I am when the world isn't watching. Elisa considered this. His apartment, his private space away from prying eyes and judgment. A chance to see the real David Walker, not the public persona. I'd like that, she said. David's smile could have powered the entire city. Really? Really. But I'm bringing dessert. You don't have to... Partners, remember? Elisa squeezed his hand. We're in this together now. As they left Miller's together, Elisa felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping kind that came from wanting something impossible, but the steady, warming kind that came from knowing someone was willing to fight alongside you. The world would still be complicated tomorrow. There would still be obstacles, still be people who didn't understand or approve. But for now, walking down the street with David's hand warm in hers, Elisa let herself believe that love might actually be enough. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like ascending into another dimension. Elisa stood beside David in the gleaming elevator, clutching a paper bag containing the best chocolate croissants she could afford from the bakery near her apartment. The higher they climbed, the more aware she became of the vast difference between their worlds. By the time the doors opened into David's private foyer, her palms were sweating despite her earlier confidence. "Welcome to my home," David said softly, watching her face as she took in the space. The penthouse was breathtaking, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Manhattan, sleek modern furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine, artwork that she was certain cost more than most people's houses. But what struck Elisa most wasn't the obvious luxury. It was how impersonal it felt. Beautiful, yes, but cold, like a very expensive hotel suite rather than a home. "It's incredible," she said honestly, walking toward the windows. The city spread out below them like a glittering carpet, the afternoon sun casting golden light across the hardwood floors. "But," David prompted, recognizing something in her tone. Elisa turned to face him, studying his expression. "Where do you actually live in this place?" David looked confused. "What do you mean? I mean, where are your photos, your books, the coffee mug you use every morning, the spot on the couch where you actually relax?" She gestured at the pristine space. "This is gorgeous, David, but it doesn't feel like you." Something flickered in David's eyes. Surprise, then understanding. "You're right. I never really thought about it that way." "Show me," Elisa said gently. "Show me the real space." David hesitated for a moment, then led her down a hallway she hadn't noticed before. He opened a door to reveal what was clearly his actual living space, a smaller room with a comfortable reading chair, bookshelves filled with dog-eared novels and business texts, a desk covered in sketches and notes, and photos scattered across a side table. "This is where I actually spend my time," David admitted, running his hand through his hair. "The living room is for appearances, I guess." Elisa picked up one of the photos. A young David with a woman who was clearly Genevieve, both of them laughing at something off camera. He couldn't have been more than 20, and there was something unguarded about his expression that made her heart squeeze. "You were so young," she murmured. "That was taken the day my first patent got approved," David said, moving to stand beside her. "Mom insisted we celebrate, even though I was too nervous about money to really enjoy it." Elisa studied the other photos. David with what looked like college friends, Genevieve at various stages of her life, a few pictures of David rock climbing and hiking that showed an adventurous side she hadn't seen before. "No girlfriends?" she asked, then immediately felt heat flood her cheeks. "Sorry, that's none of my business." "There haven't been many relationships worth photographing," David said quietly. "Most of the women I've dated were more interested in the lifestyle than the person." "That must have been lonely." "I didn't realize how lonely until I met someone who actually wanted to know who I am." David moved closer, his voice dropping. "Want to see the kitchen? I promised to cook for you." The kitchen was clearly David's domain, lived in a way the formal living space wasn't, with well-used appliances and a spice rack that spoke of someone who actually enjoyed cooking. David moved around the space with comfortable familiarity, pulling ingredients from the refrigerator. "What are we making?" Elisa asked, settling onto one of the bar stools. "Nothing fancy," David said, shooting her a grin. "Pasta carbonara, my mom's recipe, or rather, her interpretation of what she learned from our Italian neighbor when I was 12. "You learned to cook from your mum?" "Had to. She was working so many hours that if I wanted dinner before 9 p.m., I had to make it myself." David began cracking eggs with practiced efficiency. "Some of my best memories are of us cooking together on her days off, trying to recreate dishes from restaurants we couldn't afford to eat at." Elisa watched him work, noting how his shoulders relaxed, how the careful businessman facade fell away as he focused on the familiar task. This version of David, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly mussed, completely absorbed in creating something with his hands, was impossibly attractive. "Can I help?" she asked. "You're my guest," David protested, but Elisa was already sliding off the stool. "We're partners, remember?" She moved to stand beside him at the counter. "What can I do?" David handed her a block of parmesan and a grater. "Tell me about your family while you work on this." As Elisa grated cheese, she found herself sharing stories she hadn't told anyone in years, about her grandmother's legendary Sunday dinners, about Corinne's determination to become a doctor despite every obstacle, about the father who'd left when she was 8, and the mother who'd raised 2 daughters with fierce love and very little money. "My mum would have liked you," she said, then caught herself. "Would like you. She's not gone. She just moved to Atlanta to be closer to my aunt. Past tense because you don't see her often." David asked gently. Past tense because Elisa paused, surprised by her own honesty. Because I've been so ashamed of how my life turned out. Unemployed, single, struggling. She raised us to believe we could do anything, be anything. I feel like I let her down. David stopped stirring and turned to face her fully. Elisa, you're 26 years old. You're brilliant, compassionate, and stronger than anyone I've ever met. The idea that you could be a disappointment to anyone is insane. Easy to say when you've never failed at anything. I've failed at plenty, David said quietly. 3 startups that never got off the ground. A 5-year relationship that ended because I was too afraid to trust someone with the real me. 15 years of building a life that looked perfect on paper, but left me crying alone in parks. The vulnerability in his admission made Elisa look up from the cheese. Is that what you were doing that night, when you found me? David nodded. Board meeting that ran until midnight. Investors questioning every decision I've made in the past year. I went to the park because I couldn't face going home to an empty apartment and pretending everything was fine. So we were both pretending, Elisa said softly. And now we're not. David reached over and brushed a strand of hair from her face. At least not with each other. The pasta finished cooking just as the sun began to set, casting the kitchen in golden light. They ate at David's kitchen island, the conversation flowing as easily as it had at Miller's, but with a new intimacy that came from being in his private space. This is incredible, Elisa said, twirling another forkful of pasta. Your mum taught you well. Wait until you taste what you brought for dessert, David said. I've been thinking about those croissants since you mentioned them. After dinner, they moved to the couch in David's actual living room. Not the showcase space, but the comfortable area with the soft cushions and the reading lamp. Elisa curled up beside him, her head on his shoulder, feeling more relaxed than she had in months. David, she said into the comfortable silence. Thank you for showing me the real you. Not the penthouse version, this version. David's arm tightened around her. Thank you for wanting to see it. They stayed that way as the city lights came alive below them, 2 people who had found something real in a world full of pretense. For the first time since that night in the park, Elisa felt like she was exactly where she belonged. But outside, 42 floors below, a telephoto lens captured their silhouettes in the window, and by morning, the image would be on the front page of 3 different gossip websites, with headlines that would change everything once again. The photos were everywhere by Thursday morning. Elisa stared at her phone in horror as Corinne forwarded link after link. Gossip sites, entertainment blogs, even legitimate news outlets had picked up the story. Walker Technologies, CEO's mystery romance heats up, screamed one headline above a grainy but unmistakable photo of her and David, silhouetted in his apartment window, her head on his shoulder, looking like lovers lost in their own world. Tech billionaire's secret girlfriend revealed, announced another, this one featuring a clearer shot of her leaving his building the next morning, David's jacket draped over her shoulders. But it was the third headline that made her blood run cold. David Walker's board questions, CEO's judgment as romance goes public. Liz, you need to turn on Channel 7, Corinne said through the phone, her voice tight with concern. I can't watch this, Elisa said, pacing her small apartment like a caged animal. You have to, they're saying things. Elisa grabbed the remote with shaking hands and clicked to the morning news show. A perfectly coiffed anchor was discussing the story with barely concealed delight. Sources close to Walker Technologies suggest the board is deeply concerned about the CEO's recent romantic entanglement and its potential impact on the company's image. The relationship has raised questions about Walker's decision-making capabilities, and Elisa turned off the television and immediately called David. The phone went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail. A third time. Nothing. Her hands were shaking as she typed, "Are you okay? I'm seeing the news. Call me." An hour passed with no response. Then 2. By noon, Elisa felt like she was drowning in anxiety and self-recrimination. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, that being with her would damage David's carefully constructed world. When her phone finally rang at 1 p.m., she nearly dropped it in her haste to answer. David. Thank God. Miss Moore. The voice was crisp, professional, unfamiliar. This is Bellamy Henderson, Mr. Walker's attorney. He's asked me to call you. Elisa's stomach dropped. His attorney? Mr. Walker is currently in emergency board meetings regarding the media situation. He wanted me to convey that he's handling things, but it may be several days before he can speak with you directly. Several days. Elisa sank onto her couch, the room spinning slightly. What kind of emergency meetings? I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics, but I can tell you that Mr. Walker's position is secure. However, the board has requested that he maintain distance from any potentially compromising situations until this matter is resolved. The careful legal language hit her like a slap. Potentially compromising situations? You mean me? Miss Moore? No, I understand perfectly. Elisa's voice was steady, despite the tears streaming down her face. Thank you for calling, Mr. Henderson. She hung up before he could respond and immediately called Corinne. They froze him out, she said when her sister answered. His own board, his own company. They're treating this like a crisis that needs to be managed. Liz, maybe it's not as bad as it sounds. Maybe he's just protecting his business interests, Elisa finished bitterly, which is exactly what a smart CEO should do. That evening, as Elisa sat in her apartment trying to distract herself with job applications, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Genevieve. Can we meet? Something's happened. An hour later, Elisa found herself in an elegant cafe in the Upper East Side, sitting across from David's mother, who looked uncharacteristically strained. He doesn't know I'm here, Genevieve said immediately. In fact, he'd probably fire his security team if he knew I'd slipped away. Security team? The board called an emergency session yesterday morning. They've essentially placed David under house arrest until they can contain the situation. Genevieve's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. They've taken his phone, limited his access to outside communication, and assigned handlers to monitor his activities. Elisa felt sick. Because of me. Because they're terrified of losing control, Genevieve corrected sharply. Walker Technologies went public 5 years ago, which means David answers to shareholders now, not just himself. The board sees this media attention as a threat to stock prices. Then maybe they're right. Maybe I'm a threat to everything he's built. Genevieve leaned forward, her eyes intense. Do you know what David did when they showed him the photos? Elisa shook her head. He smiled. In the middle of a room full of men in suits, telling him his career was in jeopardy, he looked at that picture of you two together and smiled. Genevieve's voice grew softer. Then he told them that if they had a problem with the woman he loved, they could find themselves a new CEO. He said that? Before they essentially put him in corporate lockdown, yes. Genevieve reached across the table and took Elisa's hand. But here's what you need to understand. David has never backed down from a fight in his life. Right now, he's in that boardroom fighting for you, fighting for your future together. The question is, are you going to fight back, or are you going to let them win by default? I don't understand. The board meeting is tomorrow afternoon. Final decision about David's future with the company. They're counting on you disappearing, on this whole thing blowing over quietly. Genevieve's grip tightened. But what if you didn't disappear? What if you showed them exactly who David Walker chose to love? Mrs. Walker, Jenny, I can't just storm into a board meeting. You can't, but I can. As Thomas Walker's widow and a founding investor in the company, I still have a seat on the board when I choose to use it. Genevieve's smile was sharp as a blade. And tomorrow I'm choosing to use it. What are you asking me to do? Be there, in the lobby. Let them see you're not some gold-digging scandal they can sweep under the rug. Show them you're a woman worth fighting for. Genevieve paused. But only if you're prepared for the consequences. If you do this, there's no going back to a quiet life. You'll be part of this world whether you wanted to be or not. Elisa thought about David's smile when he looked at their photo, about the way he'd held her in the park, the vulnerability in his eyes when he cooked for her, the certainty in his voice when he said he'd choose her over everything else. What time is the meeting? She asked. Genevieve smiled, the same fierce expression Elisa had seen in David when he was determined to fight for something. 3 p.m. Walker Technologies building, 45th floor. As Elisa walked home that night, she felt something she hadn't experienced since this whole ordeal began. Purpose. Not the desperate hope of someone clinging to a fairy tale, but the steady determination of someone who had decided what was worth fighting for. Tomorrow she would find out if love really could overcome the weight of corporate pressure and social expectation. Tomorrow she would discover whether she and David were strong enough to weather the storm together. But tonight, she had a battle to prepare for. At 2:45 p.m., Elisa stood in the marble lobby of Walker Technologies, feeling like she was about to walk into battle. She had chosen her outfit with military precision, a tailored navy suit that Corinne had insisted on buying her for job interviews, her grandmother's pearl necklace, and heels that gave her confidence even as they pinched her feet. Her hair was styled in a sleek updo that framed her face, and her makeup was flawless despite her shaking hands that morning. The lobby buzzed with the usual corporate energy, but Elisa caught several employees stealing glances at her, their expressions ranging from curiosity to recognition. Word had clearly spread about David Walker's mystery woman. "Miss Moore?" A security guard approached her with polite deference. "Mrs. Walker asked me to escort you to the executive floor." The elevator ride to the 45th floor felt eternal. Elisa's heart hammered against her ribs as she tried to remember everything Genevieve had told her the night before about the board members, their personalities, their concerns. The executive floor was a study in understated power, sleek lines, expensive art, floor-to-ceiling windows that offered commanding views of the city. Genevieve waited for her near the conference room doors, looking every inch the formidable woman who had once faced down an entire social establishment for love. "You came," Genevieve said, relief evident in her voice. "I almost didn't," Elisa admitted. "I sat on the subway for 20 minutes questioning my sanity." "Sanity is overrated," Genevieve replied with a wry smile. "Courage is not." Through the glass conference room doors, Elisa could see David for the first time in 3 days. He sat at the head of a long table, surrounded by men in expensive suits, his posture rigid with barely contained frustration. Even from a distance, she could see the exhaustion in the set of his shoulders, the tension in his jaw. "He doesn't know you're here," Genevieve said quietly. "I thought it would be better as a surprise. For him or for them? Both." Genevieve straightened her shoulders and walked into the conference room. Elisa remained in the hallway, close enough to hear but out of sight, her heart racing as Genevieve's voice cut through the heated discussion. "Gentlemen, I believe you've forgotten something important in your calculations." The room fell silent. Elisa could see David's head turn sharply toward his mother, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. "Mrs. Walker," came a voice Elisa didn't recognize, "we weren't expecting you today." "Clearly. Otherwise you might have remembered that as Thomas Walker's widow and holder of 12% of this company's founding shares, I have a voice in decisions affecting the CEO position." Genevieve took a seat at the table with the authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "Now, what exactly is this emergency session about?" "Mother, you don't need to," David began, but Genevieve cut him off with a sharp look. "The media attention surrounding your personal life has created concerns about the company's image," another voice explained. "We're discussing strategies to mitigate the potential impact on stock prices and investor confidence. Strategies such as a public statement distancing the company from any personal controversies, perhaps a sabbatical for David while things settle down, possibly a change in leadership structure if the situation persists." Elisa felt her stomach drop. They weren't just attacking her, they were threatening David's entire career. "I see," Genevieve said coolly. "And has anyone bothered to consider that this situation might actually be an asset rather than a liability?" Silence. "Walker Technologies has always prided itself on innovation, on being ahead of the curve," Genevieve continued. "Yet here you sit, panicking because our CEO is in love with a brilliant, accomplished woman who happens to be black. In 2024, gentlemen, do you realize how antiquated that makes you sound?" "Mrs. Walker, with all due respect—" "No, Alderton. With all due respect to me and to my late husband's vision for this company, you're about to make the biggest mistake in Walker Technologies' history." Genevieve's voice turned sharp as steel. "You're about to fire the most successful CEO this company has ever had because he fell in love with someone you deem inappropriate. Do you have any idea what that's going to look like to the press, to potential employees, to the younger demographic that drives our user base?" Elisa could see David staring at his mother with something approaching awe. "Furthermore," Genevieve continued, "has anyone bothered to actually research the woman you're so concerned about?" "Because I have." Elisa Moore graduated summa cum laude from Columbia with a marketing degree. She spent 5 years building successful campaigns for a Fortune 500 firm before being laid off in budget cuts. She's articulate, intelligent, and has more integrity in her little finger than some of you have in your entire bodies." Elisa's eyes filled with tears. She had never had someone advocate for her so fiercely, so publicly. "The real question," Genevieve said, standing slowly, "is not whether David's relationship is appropriate. The question is whether this board is fit to lead a company that prides itself on innovation and inclusion, or whether you're all just scared old men clinging to outdated notions of propriety." "Mrs. Walker, I'm not finished." Genevieve moved toward the glass doors, and Elisa realized with a jolt what was about to happen. "You want to see the woman who has apparently caused such concern. You want to judge for yourselves whether she's worthy of your CEO." Genevieve opened the doors, and suddenly Elisa was visible to the entire boardroom. "Gentlemen, meet Elisa Moore." 12 pairs of eyes turned toward her, and Elisa felt the weight of their judgment like a physical force. For a moment, she considered running. This was David's world, David's battle, David's career on the line. But then she saw David's face. He had turned in his chair to look at her, and his expression was a mixture of shock, terror, and something else. Pride. Pure, undiluted pride. Not because she looked beautiful or professional, but because she was there, standing in his boardroom, refusing to be intimidated. "Hello?" Elisa said, stepping into the room with as much confidence as she could muster. "I'm sorry to interrupt your meeting, but I believe you've been discussing my relationship with David without actually knowing anything about me." The silence was deafening. "You're concerned about image," Elisa continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "About what it means for Walker Technologies to have a CEO who's in love with me. Let me tell you what I think it means." She moved closer to the table, making eye contact with each board member in turn. "It means you have a CEO who values authenticity over appearance, who chooses substance over superficiality, who isn't afraid to take risks when something matters to him." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Those are exactly the qualities that built this company, aren't they?" David was staring at her like she was a miracle he couldn't quite believe. "More importantly," Elisa said, her voice softening slightly, "David Walker is the most decent, honorable man I've ever known. If you're willing to throw that away because you're uncomfortable with who he loves, then maybe the problem isn't with his judgment. Maybe the problem is with yours." The room remained silent for a long moment. Then Roderick Alderton, the board chairman, cleared his throat. "Miss Moore, while we appreciate your pie perspective, this is ultimately a business decision." "Then make it a good one," Elisa interrupted. "Because if you force David to choose between me and this company, he'll choose me. And then you'll have lost the best CEO you'll ever have over your own prejudices." She turned to look directly at David, her heart in her throat. "But he shouldn't have to choose, and neither should I." With that, she walked out of the conference room, her head held high, leaving behind a boardroom full of stunned silence and one man who looked at her like she had just changed his entire world. He found her on the roof, 45 floors above the city. On Walker Technologies' private rooftop garden, Elisa stood at the edge of the terrace, her hands gripping the railing as she stared out at the sprawling metropolis below. The afternoon sun caught the tears on her cheeks, making them shimmer like diamonds. She heard his footsteps but didn't turn around. "That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen," David said quietly, "or the most reckless." "Maybe both," Elisa replied, her voice hoarse from the emotions she'd been holding back. "How did you know I'd be here?" "Security cameras. And the fact that when I'm overwhelmed, I come up here too." David moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Are you okay?" Elisa laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I just told off a room full of millionaire board members and essentially dared them to fire the man I love. No, David, I'm not okay." "The man you love?" David's voice was soft, wondering. "Don't." Elisa finally turned to face him, and David felt his heart break at the pain in her eyes. "Don't make this about that. Not right now." "Why not right now?" "Because they're going to fire you." The words burst out of her like a dam breaking. "Because I just walked into that room and handed them every reason they need to get rid of you. Because I've destroyed everything you've worked for, and I can't live with that." David stared at her, this magnificent woman who had just gone to war for him, for them, and was now tearing herself apart with guilt. "Elisa," he said gently, "they're not going to fire me. You don't know that." "Actually, I do." David reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. "Bellamy texted me 5 minutes ago. Emergency board vote, 11-1 in my favor. I keep my job, my position, everything." Elisa blinked, confusion replacing the anguish in her expression. "What?" "Apparently your little speech, combined with my mother's not-so-subtle threat to dump her shares and go public with the story, if they forced me out, made them reconsider." David's smile was soft, proud, completely in love. "You saved my career, Elisa. You saved us. I don't understand. If they voted to keep you, why do you look—" She studied his face, seeing something there she couldn't identify. "David, what's wrong?" David was quiet for a long moment, his grey eyes searching hers. When he spoke, his voice was steady but filled with emotion. "In that boardroom, watching you stand up to 12 powerful men who were questioning your worth, your place in my life." He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "Elisa, you were magnificent. Fierce and brave and absolutely brilliant. And all I could think was that I wanted to spend the rest of my life watching you be that strong, that incredible. David, I'm not finished. He reached for her hands, intertwining their fingers. For 36 years I've been building a life that looked successful on paper, but felt empty inside. Corporate achievements, financial milestones, the respect of peers who didn't actually know me. And then I found you crying on a park bench, asking the universe for just one person to hold you. Tears were flowing freely down Elisa's cheeks now, but she didn't look away. You asked for one night, David continued, his voice breaking slightly. But I want every night, every morning, every moment in between. I want to hold you when you cry and celebrate with you when you succeed. I want to cook terrible dinners together and argue about movies and build something real that doesn't need board approval or public opinion validation. David released her hands and reached into his other pocket, pulling out a small velvet box that made Elisa's breath catch. This isn't how I planned this, he said, dropping to one knee on the rooftop, 45 floors above the city where they'd found each other. I had a whole romantic speech prepared, a perfect setting, the right timing. But watching you in that boardroom, seeing you fight for us, I realized I don't want to wait for the perfect moment. I want to start our forever right now. Elisa's hands flew to her mouth, her entire body trembling. Elisa Moore, David said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. You are the most courageous, compassionate, beautiful woman I've ever known. You've made me want to be better than I ever thought possible. Will you marry me? The box opened to reveal a ring that was elegant in its simplicity, a perfect solitaire diamond that caught the afternoon light and threw rainbows across the rooftop garden. It was expensive, clearly, but not ostentatious. Beautiful without being showy. Perfect for her. David, Elisa whispered, are you sure? After everything that just happened, all the complications this is going to bring, I've never been more sure of anything in my life, David replied immediately. I love you, Elisa. Not despite the complications, but including them. I love your strength, your integrity, your refusal to be anyone other than exactly who you are. I love how you make me laugh and how you challenge me to be honest about what matters. He paused, his voice growing soft. That night in the park, you asked someone to hold you. I want to be that someone for the rest of our lives. I want to be your safe harbor when the world gets difficult, and I want you to be mine. Will you take this crazy leap with me? Elisa looked down at this man who had turned her world upside down, who had fought for her, who was now offering her everything she'd never dared to dream of. The successful businessman was gone. In his place was just David, vulnerable and hopeful and completely, utterly in love. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, of course, yes. David slipped the ring onto her finger, with hands that shook slightly, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the emotion of the past week, all the fear and hope and overwhelming love. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing through their tears, Elisa held up her hand to admire the ring. It's beautiful, she said softly. It was my grandmother's, David explained. My mother saved it for 30 years, waiting for the right woman. She gave it to me this morning before the board meeting, said she had a feeling I'd be needing it soon. Your mother knew you were going to propose today. My mother has impeccable timing, David said with a grin. And she was right. After watching you today, I couldn't wait another day to ask you to be my wife. They stood together on the rooftop, engaged and in love, and facing an uncertain but suddenly brilliant future. Below them, the city hummed with 8 million stories, but none of them mattered as much as theirs. What happens now? Elisa asked, leaning into David's embrace. Now we start planning a life together, David said simply. We figure out how to blend your world and mine into something that belongs to both of us. We deal with whatever the media throws at us. We navigate family dynamics. We argue about wedding planning. We get married, Elisa interrupted, smiling up at him. We get married, David agreed, kissing her forehead. And then we live happily ever after, one day at a time. As the sun began to set behind the Manhattan skyline, casting golden light across the rooftop garden, Elisa realized that sometimes the most impossible dreams do come true. Sometimes a woman crying on a park bench finds exactly what she needs in a stranger's embrace, and sometimes, just sometimes, love really is enough to overcome everything else. 2 years later, she still returned to the same park bench, but this time with a soft smile and a steady step. The autumn air carried the same crisp bite it had 2 years ago, and the leaves crunched beneath Elisa Walker's feet as she made her way through Central Park. But everything else had changed, everything except the bench where her life had transformed in a single desperate moment. Today she wasn't alone. "Mommy, why do we come here every year?" asked the small voice beside her. Elisa looked down at Zara, David's 7-year-old niece who had become an unexpected part of their lives 6 months ago, when David's estranged sister had asked them to take her in during a difficult divorce. The little girl had her father's dark hair, but her mother's bright, curious eyes, and she'd wrapped herself around Elisa's heart from the very first day. "Because this is where your Uncle David and I met," Elisa said, settling onto the familiar wooden bench and patting the space beside her. "This is where our family really began." Zara climbed up next to her, swinging her legs contentedly. "Tell me the story again." "Again?" Elisa laughed, the sound carrying none of the brittleness it had held 2 years ago. "You've heard it 100 times, but I like it. It's like a fairy tale, but real." Elisa wrapped her arm around the little girl, looking out at the park where other people were walking their dogs, jogging, living their lives with the casual confidence of people who belonged in the world. She had that confidence now too, hard-won but genuine. "Once upon a time," she began, falling into the familiar rhythm, "there was a very sad woman who thought she was completely alone in the world." "That was you," Zara said solemnly. "That was me. And she was sitting on this very bench crying because everything in her life had gone wrong. Her job, her boyfriend, everything that made her feel like she mattered. And then Uncle David came. And then a kind stranger heard her asking the universe for just one person to hold her, just for one night so she wouldn't feel so alone." Elisa's voice grew softer, the way it always did when she reached this part of the story. Even now, 2 years later, the memory of David's unexpected tenderness could make her chest tight with gratitude. "But he didn't just hold her for one night," Zara continued, taking over the familiar tale. "He held her forever." "Well, he's still holding her," Elisa corrected gently. "Every day." "Is that why you wear his ring?" Elisa looked down at her wedding band, not just David's grandmother's engagement ring anymore, but also the simple gold band they'd exchanged 8 months ago in a small ceremony in Genevieve's garden, with Corinne as maid of honor and Zara as flower girl. The wedding had been everything a society event wasn't: intimate, joyful, focused on love rather than spectacle. "This ring means I promise to hold him back," Elisa said. "When he's scared or sad or worried, I promise to be there for him too. Like a team." Exactly like a team. Footsteps on the path made them both look up. David was approaching with 2 cups of hot chocolate from the vendor by the park entrance, his breath visible in the cold air. At 38, he'd grown even more attractive, laugh lines at the corners of his eyes, a relaxation in his shoulders that spoke of a man who'd found his place in the world. He wore jeans and a sweater instead of a business suit, his idea of power dressing having evolved considerably. "2 hot chocolates for my favorite girls," he said, settling on Elisa's other side and handing Zara her cup. "Did you tell him we were here?" Elisa asked, accepting her own warm cup. "I always know where to find you on October 15th, David replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Besides, I have something to celebrate." "Oh!" David pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, his grin widening. The Moore Marketing Consultancy just landed the Henderson Industries account. Elisa nearly dropped her hot chocolate. "What? David, that's huge. How did you—" "Wait." She narrowed her eyes at him. "You didn't pull strings, did you? We talked about this." "I didn't pull anything," David said, holding up his hands in surrender. "Cross my heart. Tanya Henderson called me yesterday, asking for a reference because she'd heard about your work with the Davidson campaign. I told her the truth, that you're the most brilliant marketing mind I know, and I'm biased because I'm married to you." Elisa stared at the contract, her eyes filling with tears. For 18 months she'd been building her consulting business from the ground up, taking small clients, proving herself project by project. Landing Henderson Industries meant she could move into the bigger league, compete for major accounts, build something truly her own. "I'm proud of you," David said softly. "You did this entirely on your own merit." "We did this," Elisa corrected, leaning into his warmth. "Your belief in me, your willingness to let me find my own way, that mattered." "Can we go feed the ducks now?" Zara asked, apparently immune to the emotional weight of career milestones. "In a minute, sweetheart," David said. "There's one more thing." He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a small wrapped box, handing it to Zara. "This is for you." Zara tore off the paper with the enthusiasm of a 7-year-old, revealing a jewelry box. Inside was a small silver bracelet with a single charm, a heart engraved with Zoo. "What's Zoo?" Zara asked, holding up the bracelet. Zara Elizabeth Walker, Elisa said softly, understanding immediately. David's voice was gentle but steady. We know you miss your mum, and nothing will ever change the fact that she's your mum. But if you want, we'd like to officially adopt you, make you a Walker for real, not just in our hearts. Zara looked back and forth between them, her young face serious. Would I still be me? You'd still be exactly you, Elisa assured her, just with legal paperwork that says we're your parents now. And I could stay forever, even when Mum gets better. David and Elisa exchanged a look. Miriam's struggles with addiction and mental health were ongoing, and while they hoped she would recover, Zara needed stability now. Forever, David promised. No matter what happens, you're our daughter now if you want to be. Zara threw her arms around both of them, the hot chocolate forgotten. Yes, I want to be a Walker. As they sat there, the three of them wrapped in an impromptu family hug on the bench where it all began, Elisa marveled at how life had unfolded. She'd asked the universe for one person to hold her for one night, and instead she'd received a husband who held her every day, a mother-in-law who fought fiercely for her happiness, a sister-in-law who'd become her best friend, and now a daughter who filled their home with laughter and chaos and pure joy. Should we head home? David asked eventually. Mum's expecting us for dinner, and you know how she gets when we're late. In a minute, Elisa said, standing and walking to the exact spot where she'd sat 2 years ago, broken and desperate. She closed her eyes and whispered, so softly only the wind could hear, "Thank you." When she opened her eyes, David was watching her with that same expression he'd worn the night he proposed, complete love, total acceptance, unwavering commitment to their future together. "What were you thinking about?" he asked as they gathered their things. "Just gratitude," Elisa said simply. "Sometimes I can't believe this is my life." "Our life," David corrected, taking her hand. "Our life," Elisa agreed, her wedding ring catching the afternoon sunlight. As they walked toward the park exit, David carrying a chattering Zara on his shoulders, while Elisa swung their joined hands between them, Elisa looked back once at the bench that had changed everything. Some stories begin with, "Once upon a time," she thought, but the best ones never really end. They just keep getting better, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of courage at a time. And this story, their story, was just beginning. The autumn wind carried the sound of their laughter as they disappeared into the city, a family born from a single moment of vulnerability and grown into something beautiful, lasting, and completely their own. Sometimes, after all, the universe really does listen when you ask for exactly what you need. Final message. What did this story teach you about taking chances on love, even when everything seems impossible? Would you have made the same choice Elisa did that night in the park? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.